It's a P4, mate. Good job out there. Well managed. Charge on. And pick up, please.
Oh, mate. That was pretty bad overall. So much opportunity today that was missed. Yeah. Thank you, Mo, for continuing to push. And thanks to this mega crowd here. Sorry I couldn't bring it home.
Yeah, definitely. Let's speed up from there. And Norris and Piastri is 7 seconds behind. Hulkenberg 28 behind Piastri. Yeah, you Verstappen 17 seconds. And Gasly, Stroll, Albon, Alonso, Russell P10, and Charles P14.
Have you ever wondered what a 7-time world champion feels when your car simply does not respond? Hamilton's radio after the Silverstone 2025 GP is not just a complaint, it is a desperate cry, and we are going to crumble word by word. Silverstone, more than a circuit, is a temple for Lewis Hamilton. It is the place where he consolidated his legend, where he has received deafening ovations, where he has raised trophies and has made a whole nation vibrate. And yet, in 2025, that same route witnessed one of the most painful days in his recent career. Finishing may seem a decent result to the naked eye, but the truth is much more raw and frustrating. In Formula One, not everything is measured in positions. It is measured in sensations, in control, in connection between the pilot and the car. And what Hamilton felt when crossing the finish line was not satisfaction or relief, it was pure disappointment, encapsulated in a simple but devastating message, one of the most difficult I can remember having had. That phrase does not arise from momentary anger, nor from a punctual defeat. It is the echo of a deep problem that has been brewing from the first day that Hamilton climbed to SF25. Because Silverstone, with its rapid curves, changes in demanding aerodynamic lifting and load, exposes cars that are not balanced. And the SF25 is not only not balanced, it is erratic, nervous, ungovernable. Throughout the weekend, the car showed symptoms of technical decomposition. He jumped in each curve, reacted abruptly to the changes of direction, and, the most alarming, did not provide the slightest sense of confidence to the pilot. When Hamilton said on the radio that the car jumped, was not exaggerating. He was describing a physical and mental torture that even prevented him from drawing the curves with the aggressiveness that has characterized him for more than a decade. But the real drama is not only in technical difficulty, but in emotional contrast. This race was special. It was Silverstone. It was his house. It was the opportunity to show the British fans that his signing by Ferrari made sense, that the change of team was not the beginning of the sunset, but the first step towards a new top. What lived was exactly the opposite. A car unable to stand firm, to respond precisely, to offer even a stable performance apex on one of the most important weekend in the calendar. And that frustration became palpable in each lap. Every time he stepped on the accelerator, he did it with doubts. Each curve entrance became a risky bet. Each exit felt like a lottery. It is not just a complicated career. It is an emotional fracture between a legendary pilot and a car that, far from enhancing it, limits it, saboted it, punishes it. Silverstone should be a tribute. It ended up being a silent humiliation. Because the hardest thing about that radio message is not what was said. It is what was not said. The feeling of helplessness, of having given everything and yet could not have made the difference. At that moment, a pilot did not speak. A world champion spoke who found himself alone, with a car that became an enemy, and with millions of eyes looking at him without knowing that the hardest thing was happening inside. In a discipline where speed is mixed with tactical intelligence, a single bad decision can transform a grand prize into a nightmare. And that was exactly what Lewis Hamilton lived in Silverstone. A strategic sake that stripped him of any real podium possibility. Because it is not enough to have the right pilot or survive the mechanical difficulties of the car. In modern Formula One, the moment in which you enter boxes, the type of tire you choose, and, above all, how you interpret the changing conditions of the track, can make the difference between glory and disenchantment. Hamilton was clear. He had been managing a difficult race, yes, but with rhythm to stay in the fight. It was in a position that, despite the problems of the car, could become a solid result. But then the call came. That box order that, instead of promoting it forward, pushed him towards the abyss. Ferrari chose to change slicks tires ahead of time, anticipating a track that was not yet ready. The asphalt was still wet in some key sections, and dry tires simply did not have the necessary grip to perform in those conditions. The result was immediate and devastating. Loss of traction, times due to return, and, the most painful, a fall in the classification that seemed to make no sense from the pilot's perspective. Hamilton did not hide it. In his communication after the team, there was bewilderment, but also a truth that weighs more than any data on the timesheet. We lost many positions through the strategy. I'm not really sure of how I was in P4 and then I went out in P8". That phrase, beyond its explicit content, betrays a rupture of trust. When a pilot does not understand what his own wall is doing, something fundamental is lost. The connection between man and his team. And that disconnection, in a world where every second is measured with surgical precision, it can be as destructive as an engine failure. But Ferrari's strategic error was not an isolated accident. It was the symptom of a tactical structure that seems not to live up to modern demands. Because it wasn't just Hamilton who suffered. The entire team gave signs of improvisation, lack of reaction to what happened on the track. While other teams patiently waited for the track to dry completely, evaluating microselectors, asphalt temperatures and wear simulations, Ferrari opted for a precipitated reading of the environment. And that error is paid. It is paid with positions, with points, and above all, with the credibility of the team. This is not the first time that the Scuderia makes an error of this type, but in the case of Hamilton, the damage is deeper. Because he arrived in Ferrari not only for his talent, but also for the promise of a renewed structure, capable of correcting the ghosts of the past. What he found in Silverstone was a repetition of errors that he believed buried. And he lived it with frustration, helplessness, and a painful feeling of déjà vu. In a team where every second counts, losing 4 positions for a bad call is not just a stroke. It is a devastating message. They are not yet ready to fight for the top. In that second strategic block, the possibility of a different narrative was collapsed. What could have been an inspiring recovery ended up being one more proof of the abyss between Hamilton's ambitions and Ferrari's reality. And that crack does not close talented. It closes with successful decisions, with perfect synchrony between track and wall, something that in Silverstone simply did not exist. There are cars that are born winners. Others simply fail to find their identity. And then there is the SF25, a car that, a race after a race, seems to be defined not for its potential but for its chaos. In Silverstone, that dysfunction reached its most visible point. Lewis Hamilton expressed it directly and without euphemisms. This car doesn't like these conditions at all. With those words, he made it clear that SF25 is not just a technical challenge, but an unpredictable monster under rain or in mixed conditions. What should be an extension of the pilot on the track became a distrust factor, an internal threat that sabotaged each attempt to compete at the highest level. Since its presentation, the SF25 has generated more questions than answers. Ferrari promised an evolution of the SF24, with adjustments in the front suspension, greater aerodynamic stability, and a better thermal management of the tires. However, what arrived on track was a car with an extremely narrow operation window. If the conditions are not perfect, the performance collapses. And that is exactly what happened in Silverstone. The asphalt temperature fluctuated, the humidity remained in the environment, and the crosswind altered the curved aerodynamic load after curve. In that environment, Hamilton's Ferrari behaved like an injured animal. Unpredictable, erratic, and above all, unstable. Hamilton needs a car that reacts to his orders, which allows him to push without fear of losing control, which gives him tools to fight. What it has is the opposite. A machine that responds late, badly, and violently. And that, for a pilot of his caliber, is more frustrating than any defeat. SF25 is not just an engineering problem. It is a psychological obstacle, a barrier that prevents him from deploying his talent. And as long as that barrier exists, there will be no strategy or motivation that manages to compensate for it. What happened in Silverstone was not just a specific disappointment. It was an alarm signal. Hamilton's radio at the end of the race is much more than an expression of frustration. It is an emotional diagnosis of a project that, until now, has not fulfilled its promise. Ferrari signed a 7-time world champion with the intention of returning Maranello to the top. But until this point of the season, what has been seen is a car that limits it, a strategy that harms it, and an environment that still fails to provide the necessary tools to compete at the level required by its history. And then the inevitable question arises: how long will Hamilton wait? How much more time can this disconnection endure between what he knows what he can do and what the car allows him to execute? Because what is at stake here is not just a season. It is his legacy. Each Grand Prix that is disputed without real solutions is a lost opportunity to build a career closure worthy of its talent. And when the signs of frustration begin to become public, when a pilot with his experience is no longer saved by radio, it means that internal cracks are about to become irreversible cracks. Therefore, what we hear on your radios should not be taken lightly. It is a symptom, but also a warning. If Ferrari does not react soon, not only risk losing the course of this season, risk to break the trust with a pilot who has opted everything for his red shirt. And in Formula One, when that trust is broken, it is very difficult to rebuild it. Because time does not expect. The championship continues. And the rivals do not forgive. Now it's your turn. Do you think Ferrari can still give Hamilton a competitive car this year? Or are we seeing the beginning of a story of frustration that will only grow with each race? I want to know your opinion.